Hello there, this is James Scroff, it is 1978, and if you're one of those not racists honest who lies awake at night terrified that by 2050 whites will no longer be the majority and that within the next century or so the white race will become extinct, then as Ian Honey Lopez mentions in his book Dog Whistle Politics, How Coded Racial Appeals Have Reinvented Racism and Wrecked the Middle Class, the solution could not be easier. Simply declare Asians, in inverted commas, as well as Jews and Hispanics and Latinos of European descent, many of whom already regard themselves as white, to be officially white, and will remain the majority for decades, if not centuries to come. And before you dismiss that suggestion as absurd, remember that our ancestors did precisely that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Before that point, Irish, Italians, and Catholics in general, as well as Slavs and all other Eastern Europeans, weren't considered to be white either. After all, explaining this with big print and lots of pictures for the benefits of those people in the back, the entire concept of distinct races identified by colour, as well as the handy colour-coded hierarchy in which white was at the top and black was at the bottom, were literally invented by Germanic and Anglo-Saxon Europeans to explain, rationalise, justify, and above all, maintain our supposedly natural dominance and supremacy. In short, the only reason why the concept of a white race was created to begin with was to justify our exploitation of the black race, in inverted commas, and our extermination of the quote-unquote red. But having only originally deigned ourselves to be worthy of the honour of being part of the in-group, over the centuries, the inevitable march of demographic progress has compelled us to throw the net ever wider, accepting more and more people into the quote-unquote white club based on absolutely nothing but the fact that we don't perceive them as being quite as bad as the other whose dominance and supremacy we genuinely fear and despise. In the 19th century, it was the Irish and Catholics in general who self-identified white people feared would take over. Today, it's quote-unquote Muslims and bad hombres, in other words, scary brown people, along with the ever-feared and despised Negroes, and having indoctrinated all people everywhere over the course of several centuries into accepting this artificial racial hierarchy as the natural order, which must be preserved because reasons, there are countless honorary whites, for lack of a better term, who are champing at the bit to be granted the privilege of no longer being judged to be coloured. Even now, in fact, Hispanic and Latino Americans are already dividing themselves into the good ones, usually better off and of lighter skin, and the bad ones who give the rest of them a bad name. Before neo-Nazis settled the question for us by pointing out that regardless of how we define them, anti-Semitism is still rampant, the so-called Western world's undeclared war of civilization versus barbarism against Islam led many to wonder whether Jews were now white, bearing in mind that just as is the case with all tribalism, to be accepted as part of the us group is based entirely upon what you oppose, not what you are. And speaking of which, leaving aside the fact that Asian is such a grossly overgeneralized and patronizing term that we may as well simply say yellow, one of the things that makes Asians the so-called model minority beyond their perceived submissiveness and acceptance of white supremacy is the stereotype that they're even more racist against those damn dirty Negroes than we are. So in the end, Captain, I'm not racist, I'm preserving white culture and heritage. The solution to your fear-mongering claims that the white race is facing extinction is, ironically enough, to accept that it never existed to begin with, to simply admit that what you actually fear is losing your privilege and power within society, and that therefore, no different from our ancestors who bit their tongues and accepted Irish scum as part of the white club solely to prevent them from banding together with those damn dirty Negroes, if not you, then the next generation or the one after that will accept yellow and mulatto-coloured people as a buffer against Arabs and Negroes to preserve the greater racism, all in the name of maintaining your cultural and political supremacy, you rancid and self-serving scum.